Sometimes the most disturbing person in your life isn't a stranger you meet in a dark alley. It's the person who has a key to your front door, the person who knows when you come home, the person sleeping only a few meters away from you. And sometimes, you don't discover what they're really like until something happens in the middle of the night. These are 5 stories about roommates who turned an ordinary living situation into something their housemates would never forget. The first story begins with a man who barely seemed to exist outside his bedroom. When a young employee had to relocate for work, his company arranged a temporary apartment for him. It was a fairly ordinary place with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. His roommate was already living there. His name was Mark. From the beginning, Mark was strange. The apartment itself was almost completely empty. There was hardly any furniture, nothing interesting on the walls, and very little that made the place feel like somebody actually lived there. Mark didn't help. He rarely came out of his bedroom. When the new roommate tried to introduce himself, Mark barely said hello before disappearing behind his bedroom door. At first, there was nothing particularly frightening about that. Some people are simply antisocial. So he ignored it. But after a few days, he started noticing things that felt different. One night, he stayed awake much later than usual. Eventually, he left his bedroom to put something in the kitchen. As he walked past Mark's room, he noticed something unusual. The door was open. That alone wouldn't have been strange. What he saw inside was, there was almost nothing in the room. Just a bed, no obvious personal belongings, no television, no furniture, and Mark wasn't there. He stood there for a moment, wondering where his roommate could have gone. Then he decided it wasn't worth investigating. About a week later, something happened that made him much more uncomfortable. It was the middle of the night. He had woken up thirsty and walked into the kitchen for some water. The apartment was completely dark. He opened the refrigerator, and its light illuminated part of the room. That's when he noticed someone standing in the living room. It was Mark. He was completely still. He wasn't sitting down. He wasn't walking. He was simply standing there in the darkness, facing in his direction. His bedroom door was closed behind him. The roommate couldn't understand what Mark was doing. He got his water and started walking back toward his bedroom. As he passed, he stopped. "Hi, Mark." Nothing. Mark didn't answer. He just stood there. After several uncomfortable seconds, the roommate quietly said goodnight and went back to his room. The next morning, Mark was nowhere to be seen. That experience was enough to convince him that he didn't want to stay there. Within days, he found another apartment and moved out. He only saw Mark once more. He told him he was leaving. Mark simply said goodbye and walked away. And that was the end of it. To this day, there was never an explanation for why Mark had been standing alone in the dark that night. Maybe there was a perfectly normal reason. But when you barely know the person sharing your home, sometimes the unanswered questions are what stay with you. The second story happened in a college dorm. A freshman was assigned a random roommate named Sam. At first, Sam seemed normal enough. He wasn't particularly friendly, but he wasn't openly hostile either. He had his own friends, spent a lot of time away from the dorm, and usually kept to himself. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. Then the noises started. One night, after midnight, the student was working on an assignment when he heard something strange. It sounded almost like wind howling outside, but the sound didn't seem to be coming from outdoors. It sounded as though it was somewhere inside the building. He went into the hallway to investigate. There was nobody there. The noise eventually stopped. He went back inside. A few nights later, he heard something much worse. A woman screaming. The scream sounded genuine. It wasn't a distant noise that could easily be mistaken for something else. It sounded like someone was frightened. He immediately got out of bed and searched the hallway. Again, there was nobody there. The screaming stopped. He returned to his room and tried to forget about it. Then, on another late night, he heard a man's voice. The voice sounded close, but the words didn't make any sense. He checked the hallway. Nothing. The voice continued. Then he realized it wasn't coming from the hallway at all. It sounded like it was coming from Sam's closet. He looked over. Sam appeared to be asleep. The student opened the closet door. At first, he couldn't see anything unusual. Then he moved some clothes aside. A small speaker was hidden behind them. The strange voice suddenly stopped, and almost immediately Sam sat up. He was angry. The student confronted him and asked why he had been playing those disturbing sounds. Sam denied it. Instead of laughing and admitting it was a prank, he accused his roommate of going through his belongings. The argument became heated. But the student now had a possible explanation for everything he'd heard. The screams, the voices, the strange noises. They may have all been deliberately created by his roommate. The next day, things got even worse. When the student returned from class, His belongings had been thrown around the room. His clothes were on the floor. His blankets had been moved. Other possessions had been disturbed. He took photographs and reported what happened to the dorm management. Soon afterward, the two were separated and given different roommates. The disturbing noises were never supernatural. They came from a speaker hidden in the closet. But perhaps that was the most uncomfortable part. The person trying to frighten him wasn't some unknown presence in the hallway. It was the person sleeping in the same room. The third story begins with a warning that seemed almost harmless. A man had recently moved into an apartment with a roommate named Ryan. They weren't best friends, but they got along reasonably well. On their first day living together, Ryan mentioned something important. He sometimes sleepwalked. He explained that he could get out of bed and perform ordinary actions without remembering them afterward. He even described waking up once while sitting at a table with food in front of him. It sounded strange, but harmless. Until one night. Around 2 a.m, his roommate woke to footsteps outside his bedroom. Someone was walking back and forth through the hallway, again and again. He assumed Ryan was sleepwalking. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. He went back to sleep. Sometime later, he woke up again. His bedroom door was opening. Ryan walked inside. The room was dark. The roommate asked him what he was doing. Ryan didn't respond. He simply stood there, staring blankly. The roommate quickly realized he might actually be sleepwalking. After standing there for a while, Ryan turned around and walked back out. The next morning, they talked about it and even laughed. But then it happened again. This time, Ryan walked directly toward the bed. His roommate told him to go back to his own room. Ryan ignored him. He kept walking. Then he reached the bed and grabbed the front of his roommate's shirt. Suddenly, this didn't feel like harmless sleepwalking anymore. The roommate pushed him away and repeatedly told him to wake up. Eventually, Ryan backed off and left. The next day, Ryan again blamed sleepwalking, but his roommate no longer felt comfortable. He bought a lock for his bedroom door and started locking it every night. A few days later, he woke to the sound of glass breaking. The noise was coming from the kitchen. He heard plates and glasses smashing against the floor. He stayed inside his locked room. The sounds continued for several minutes before finally stopping. In the morning, he found broken dishes scattered across the kitchen. Ryan was still there. When confronted, he barely seemed concerned. Then, just a few days later, Ryan announced that he was moving out. He packed his belongings and prepared to leave with almost no notice. Before leaving, he shook his roommate's hand. And then he said something that completely changed the meaning of everything that had happened. Ryan admitted that he wasn't actually a sleepwalker. The roommate had spent weeks believing those terrifying encounters were accidental. But according to Ryan himself, they weren't. And that meant the locked bedroom door hadn't been an overreaction. It may have been the only thing keeping him separated from a roommate who knew exactly what he was doing. The fourth story is even harder to prove. But if the person telling it was right, the roommate may have been involved in a burglary. The house belonged to several college friends. They needed one additional roommate to help with the rent, so a girl named Jenna was invited to move in. She wasn't particularly close to the group. She mostly stayed in her bedroom and didn't spend much time with the others. Nobody thought too much about it. Then, near the end of the school year, one of the roommates woke up at around 2 a.m. She heard quiet voices outside. At first, she thought people might be talking somewhere nearby. But then she realized the voices seemed to be coming from the backyard. She went to her window and carefully moved the shade. Someone was standing outside. It looked like Jenna. She was wearing a hood and standing with her back toward the house. Then, 2 men appeared. They walked toward Jenna. The 3 of them moved toward the back of the house and eventually disappeared from view. The roommate couldn't tell exactly what happened after that. She eventually went back to sleep. The following day, everyone left for college as usual. But when they returned home later that day, something was terribly wrong. The house had been broken into. Their belongings had been searched. Valuable items were missing. Several roommates had lost possessions. Even Jenna claimed that things had been stolen from her. The police were contacted. But then the roommate remembered what she had seen the previous night. Jenna. 2 men, the backyard, 2 a.m. She confronted Jenna. Jenna denied being outside. She claimed she'd been asleep. The roommate remained convinced that she had seen her, but there was a problem. She couldn't prove it. The burglars were never caught. Then the lease ended, and after everyone moved out, Jenna cut contact with the group. She left their group chat, blocked them online. Even removed Carly, the person who had originally helped bring her into the house. It was never proven that Jenna had anything to do with the burglary. Maybe she was completely innocent. Maybe the person seen outside really was someone else. But if the roommate's memory was correct, there was a disturbing possibility. The people responsible for the burglary could have been inside or around the house while everyone was sleeping. And the person who supposedly knew them may have been sleeping under the same roof. The final story begins with what seemed like a thoughtful birthday present. A young intern had moved to a new city for work and was assigned an apartment with another employee named Monica. They got along, they became friends. Monica seemed completely normal. There was only one thing that sometimes felt strange. Late at night, she would talk to someone on the phone. Whenever her roommate asked who she was speaking with, Monica became defensive. Eventually, he stopped asking. Then his birthday arrived. He hadn't told Monica when his birthday was. Yet she somehow knew. She had bought him a poster of his favorite band. Even stranger, she had already placed it inside his bedroom. He thought it was a thoughtful gift. He thanked her, and for several days nothing seemed wrong. Then, about a week later, he looked closely at the poster. Something didn't seem right. He took it off the wall. That's when he noticed a small opening behind it, and inside that opening was a tiny camera. A wire disappeared into the wall. He followed where it appeared to lead. The other end connected toward Monica's room. Suddenly, the birthday present didn't seem thoughtful anymore. It appeared to have been positioned there to conceal a camera. A camera pointed into his bedroom. He immediately went to confront Monica. Her bedroom door was locked. He knocked. He called her phone. She didn't answer. At that point, he no longer felt comfortable staying in the apartment. He took some belongings and left. He reported what had happened and eventually managed to get out of the lease. Monica blocked his number. She blocked him online. And according to what he later heard, she was eventually evicted from the apartment and lost her job. But the most disturbing part wasn't simply finding a hidden camera. It was the realization that someone he trusted enough to share a home with had allegedly found a way to watch him without his knowledge. A roommate is supposed to be someone you can at least feel safe around. Someone who shares your kitchen, your hallway, your living space. Someone whose footsteps you hear at night and barely think twice about. But these 5 stories show how little we can sometimes know about the person living on the other side of the wall. And perhaps that's what makes these stories so disturbing. Because when you live alone, you know exactly who has access to your home. But when you live with someone else, you may never know what they're doing after you close your bedroom door. And sometimes, the scariest part isn't discovering that something was wrong. It's discovering how long it had been happening without you knowing.